my name is Carrie Howard. I work for the Audubon, Texas Coastal Conservation Program. I am the Tern coordinator, and I'm going to walk you through the colonial waterbird identification training video. Here at Audubon, our mission is to help birds and their habitats. We do this through a variety of ways: education and conservation. National Audubon Society works throughout the entire United States, but Audubon, Texas is the state office for National Audubon Society. And we do really great work for birds throughout the state of Texas. I work for the Coastal Conservation Program. Our focus is on the coast of Texas, and we do bird conservation and education from the Texas-Louisiana border down to the Mexico-Texas border. Most of our work entails colonial waterbirds and where they nest. These are called rookery islands, and we do a lot of work on 170 islands that we either own or lease those islands along the Texas coast. Here you can see the islands are scattered, usually right inside the barrier islands along the intercoastal waterways. And these are very important habitat for these water birds. These are one of their only opportunities for nesting and rearing young. And we do lots of conservation work. We do a lot of education on what these birds are here for and how we can protect them. So what is a colonial waterbird? Well, the colonial part refers to these birds' preference to nest in groups. And the waterbird refers to its dependency on water for survival, such as food. But there's a great big number of species that are in this group, colonial waterbird, and we'll go through a few of them and then we'll identify them by pictures. So the pelicans are in this group, the American white pelican and the brown pelican. We have the double-crested cormorants and neotropical cormorants, the ahinga. We have heron and egret species, night herons. We also have white ibis, white-face ibis, the roseate spoonbill, laughing gulls, and then a huge variety of tern species, and then of course the black skimmer. We'll be specifically going through many of the bird species that we see here on the Texas coast, and most of them that are nesting on the Texas coast. Not all of the colonial waterbird species actually nest on the Texas coast, but we'll be focusing on the species that do, and an easy way for you to identify them. So where shall we begin? It can be very overwhelming to try to go out and identify birds when you're not familiar, so I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks on how to go about the identification process. First, we should be looking at shape. So taking a look at this diagram, you can see the outline of a horse, a cow, and deer. And without seeing the coloring or the details, just from the black and white outline, you can see that these are all very different, and you can pretty much make out what these are. So studying the shape of the bird is also going to help you determine what the bird is. So the first profile we have is the pelican, the middle profile is a heron, and then we have the last profile is an ibis. And we'll be talking more about studying the shapes and identifying these birds. The other thing that we'll be looking at is the reference in size. Here in this image, you're seeing three different sizes of birds. We've got the very large white bird, we've got a medium-sized bird, and then we've got a much smaller, bluer bird, and we'll be going through which each of these birds are. But keep in mind, the size may vary depending on the species, and that will help you identify the bird. The other thing is taking a look at your surroundings. So if you're seeing multiple birds, and you're noticing some of them are bigger and some are larger, and you're having a hard time referencing, let's say, who is this guy? What you can do is make a determination based on its size. So we've got some much larger egrets in the background, and we've got some smaller heron in the foreground. And then we've got this white bird. Looks very similar, but it's much smaller. So taking a look at its size reference in relation to the birds around it will help you determine what kind of bird it is. The other thing that we'll be looking at is the markings on the bird. So when you're taking a look at a person and you're describing it to somebody else, for a human, you'll be looking at the hair color. You might look at the eye color. Other distinguishing features might be, what is this person wearing? Do they have a hat or glasses on? We'll be looking at those same features, but just for a bird. Many times these birds will have distinguishing features on the head or neck, could also have patterns on the back or belly, and then lots of birds have distinguishing characteristics on the wings and the tails. So knowing the different parts of the bird will also help you in knowing where the markings are and identifying the bird. So the water bird groups that we're going to go through. First, we're going to cover the waders, the cormorants, pelicans, and then we'll get to the terns, skimmers, and gulls. For the waders, we have a chart for you to go through. The first questions you'll be asking yourself is it a big bird? Is it medium size or small? So if it's a big bird, we'll be looking at, is it white? Is it kind of a bluish color? And then we have a couple of selections between that. Next, we'll be going through the medium-sized birds, and we'll be looking at, does it have a straight bill or does it have a crazy bill? And then from there, we'll break it down even to what type of the crazy bill. Finally, through the waders portion, we'll be looking at the smaller bird. Is it small bird with long legs and long necks? What is the color of the body? Or is it a small bird with a squatty body and very short legs? So let's start with the large waders. So there's two very distinct large wading birds. The great blue heron is a very large bird, approximately 4 foot tall. It's got a grayish body and a yellow bill, but it's got some very distinguishing markings on its head, and some white and black or dark blue patterns. Then we have the great egret, and this is very distinct, very large white bird with a yellow bill. What's important for you to know is, regardless of whether it's got blue or white body, that it has the name great in both of its names. Great blue heron and great egret. These are the largest of the waders, so it'll be easy to remember the great in each of their names. If it's the blue heron, it'll be a bluish gray body. If it's all white, it'll be the egret. Next, we're going to go into the medium-sized waders. And our options were, does it have a straight bill or does it have a crazy bill? We'll go through each of these with pictures as well. So here's our medium waders. The reddish egret is one of the only medium waders that has a straight bill for our area. You'll notice from these pictures there's a dark morph, which has that beautiful reddish color neck and head with a bluish back. But it also has a white morph, which can be easily confused with other white egrets. So what is important for you to remember about this bird is that the bill is half light and half dark. If it's got a half light, half dark bill, it's probably a reddish egret. And then, of course, the dark morph and white morph are characteristics you can see from the coloring of the feathers. So that's for our straight billed. Then if we have a crazy bill, we have a couple of options. The roseate spoonbill is a beautiful, bright pink bird. In this nesting season, which is typically spring and summer, it'll be very vibrant pink. But in the wintertime, it will still have some distinguishing pink. It'll just be a little more muted. Or the juvenile might have more muted pink. But what's very distinguishing also about this bird, in addition to its feather colors, is the spoon-shaped bill. It almost looks like a wooden spoon you would use for cooking. So that is how you'll determine the roseate spoonbill from some of the other crazy bills. So let's look at the other ones. The other bird option that we have is the ibis. And the ibis has a very unusual curved bill. From this option, from curved-billed ibis, we have the white ibis, which is largely white throughout its body. And then we have the white-faced ibis, which is kind of reddish browns and other natural mottled colors throughout its body. But in the summertime, in the nesting season, it will have a white marking around its face. So it's easy to determine between the two. The white ibis will always have a full white body. The white-faced ibis will largely have more brown throughout its body. And then in the summer or nesting season, you'll be able to see the white around its face. These bird species are a little easier to tell the difference. Then we're going to go to the smaller bird species of the waders. And we're going to be asking, is it has a long neck and long legs, or is it squatty, short-bodied? So from our small waders, the smaller birds, long necks and long legs, we're going to be asking, does it have a white body or a blue body? So let's go through them. The snowy egret has a white body, much like the great egret, but it's a much smaller bird. It's about half the size or less than half the size of the great egret. But one of the other characteristics that look very different from the great egret is it has a black bill instead of a yellow bill. The other characteristic, which can sometimes be seen, is the yellow feet, or sometimes called yellow slippers. That's the snowy egret. The cattle egret can also have a yellow bill, but it's much smaller again, not nearly as large as the great egret. It's got the yellow beak, and then it often has some brown on the head and back. Another distinguishing characteristic for the cattle egret is saddled up next to how it got its name. The cattle egret is found on the coast, but more often you'll find it around cows and other types of cattle. Then we have the tricolored heron. This is a small blue heron, but it's got some white mottling or white coloring throughout its body. So typically will be mostly blue, but you'll see some white markings along the neck. You'll see some white markings underneath the body, and then you'll find some yellow on the upper part of the neck and around the face. So if you're seeing three colors on a blue heron, then it's the tricolored heron. The little blue heron is one of the smallest small birds with the long neck and long legs, but it's got a full blue body, so that's in contrast to the tricolored heron. And it also has a very small black tip on its beak. Then we're looking at the smaller birds, but in contrast to the long legs and long neck, we're going to be looking at these squatty bodies and these very short legs. These are the night herons. There are two species of night herons that we see around here. The yellow crowned night heron will have a yellow or a whitish crown or marking on the very top of its head. In contrast, the black crowned night heron will have almost a full black crown portion on the top of its head. These help you identify the birds and distinguish between the two of them. The juveniles, which are not quite adults, they look almost identical whether it's a yellow crowned night heron or black crowned night heron. So unfortunately, there's no telling signs in the field for you to determine which the juvenile belongs to. Now we're going to move into the cormorants. The cormorant is a really unusual bird. It actually is, the bill is designed for eating fish, and the bird's body is designed for diving deep under the water to fish. So many times after the bird's been feeding, it will need to assume a really unusual position of spreading its wings to dry. And this shape typically tends to look like a bat shape. So that's one interesting characteristic for the cormorant. Mostly in this region of Texas, we see the neotropical cormorant. Almost all cormorants that you see will be the neotropical cormorant. We do have a double-crested cormorant, We don't typically see this species as often. We tend to see it in some of our east neighboring states like Louisiana and Alabama. But on occasion, the upper Texas coast does get some double-crested cormorants. And then during nesting season or the springtime, you see these two white ploufs of feathers on either side of its head, typically looking like horns or the crest, and that's where it gets its name. When it's not breeding season, it's very difficult to determine the difference between the neotropical and the double-crested cormorants. But because we have so many of the neotropical, most of the time what you're seeing is the neotropical cormorant. Now we'll go into the pelicans. The most prominent bird that we have on the Texas coast throughout the entire year is our brown pelicans. The adults will have some white on their head but be predominantly brown on their bodies. But the juvenile brown pelicans will be almost completely brown. And you're seeing in the middle picture here some little babies that are all white. Those are not white pelicans. Those are actually brown pelican babies. And they will eventually lose that white down and get the brown feathers like their juvenile and adult counterparts. We do get the American white pelican. We typically see this bird in the wintertime, and there's a very small colony in the southern part of the Texas coast that does hang out year-round. Although that is pretty unusual, most of our white pelican species we only see in the winter down here, and they actually breed up north in the northern states of the U.S. Now we'll go through the terns, the skimmers, and the gulls. These are birds characterized by very short legs. They'll have squatty bodies. Their bills will be pointed and designed for fishing or diving. And then also what's interesting about these birds is they will really have difference in colors, patterns during breeding season versus non-breeding season, which is typically the wintering season. So we'll go through what those look like. The largest of the terns is the Caspian tern. The Caspian tern has a very strong red bill. In the summer, you can really see a very large black cap on its head, but you can also see the wintering colors, that black cap tends to fade, but the red bill is still very prominent. An easy way to remember the Caspian tern and the red bill is that the Caspian Sea lies adjacent to Russia. And we typically think of Russia in red as their colored flag. So think of Caspian Sea, red, Russia. Caspian tern. The royal tern has more of an orange or gold bill. It also has a very strong, prominent black cap in the breeding season or summertime. But in the wintertime, it almost looks like a balding old guy, where it has more white on the front of its head and then little traces of dark around the edges. One easy way to remember the royal tern is the crown of gold. Think royalty. So the royal tern has an orange or gold bill. Think of gold crown. Royalty, royal tern. The other tern species are the sandwich terns, Forester terns, and least terns. The sandwich tern is a smaller tern of the other species. And what's interesting about this bird is although it does look different in the summer and winter, it typically has a yellow dab or coloring or marking on the tip of its beak. So it's easily characterized by thinking sandwich tern. The sandwich tern has a yellow dab of mustard on the end of its bill after eating a sandwich. That's a really great way to distinguish the sandwich terns from other terns. For the Forester tern, it has a typical blaze orange color in addition to the black on its bill. So you can think of forestry and hunting and that blaze orange that's often used by hunters. Then the least tern is the smallest of all the tern species. Although if you don't have a size reference, one thing you can think of is this is a tiny little bird with a very big attitude. They can be very loud and vocal and aggressive if you're disturbing them in any way. So if you see a tern you think might be a least tern, think of the smallest leastie as a wee little beastie. It's got some nice characteristics through the summer and winter, but its attitude will almost always give this bird away when you're trying to identify it. The next bird that we have is the black skimmer. The black skimmer's, its markings or characteristics that's most predominant is that the lower part of the bill is much longer than the top part of the bill. That is usually a dead giveaway for this bird species. The summer colors and the winter colors vary slightly, as the winter colors tend to look a little more rugged or a little more muted colors. But another characteristic that will really give this bird away is the way that it feeds. This is one of the only birds that will lower that bottom jaw into the water, and it will skim the top of the water for its food. Then we also have the gulls. The laughing gull is one of the most abundant gulls that we have along the Texas coast. It's got a very unusual call, more of like a laughing call. Ha, 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 ha. We typically hear that, especially around the breeding season. The black cap, or the full black head, will really be a strong feature in the summer and spring seasons when it's nesting. But in the winter season, we typically see that black muted a little more into gray. It still has that very distinguishing call. In contrast, the ring-billed gull is largely white with some gray on the back and a black tail, but a good distinguishing feature for this bird is that ring around its bill, that dark ring, and that will help you determine that bird. So in summary, for you to keep in mind, your breeding seasons, many of these birds' colors on the adults are going to be much brighter, much more vibrant. In contrast, the winter season, the birds may look a little scruffier, more drab colors, and then also the juveniles typically have more scruffy and drab colors. The other thing to pay attention to is the color of the legs and the color of the bills. That will almost always help you identify what type of bird you're looking at when it comes to the colonial water birds. As you continue birding, keep a few things in mind. You may want to explore and find a few good bird guides that you take with you and study as you go. When you go out birding, try to go with a buddy or find an experienced birder that can teach you some of the tricks of the trade. Many people that have been birding a long time will also carry around a camera. The camera can be very useful. You can take a picture of the bird that you're seeing if you can't identify it in the field, and then you can look at that picture closer on your computer when you get home with your bird guide, and will help you distinguish what bird you actually saw out in the field. And the last thing for you to keep in mind is don't get too frustrated. There are many, many different bird species out there, and it takes some time to get to know what these birds look like, and it takes many times looking at the same bird over and over before the reference comes to mind of, oh, I know what this bird is. Think about it in your classroom. The first day of class, you see many, many different students, and you aren't always able to identify what student has what name. But by the third class, most of those faces become recognizable. By the end of your school year, you pretty much know the face and the name. And that's much like the birding. Once you start to see these birds over and over, you start to identify them. The names will come to you as you see them in a repetitive form. So that concludes our Colonial Waterbird ID program. We're excited to get you outside and start your surveys and start learning what these birds look like in reference to their name. We hope to see you soon. Happy birding.